Wendigo, the demon of hunger. This story of a hunter named Henrik begins when he and his brother Samuel were small. Their family was wealthy, but their parents' greed drove them into bankruptcy. While searching for ways to snake their way back into society's upper class, they eventually abandoned their boys to fend for themselves. They never saw their parents again. Growing up well off, the brothers felt they deserved special treatment, even after their parents had disappeared. When they didn't receive what they felt they were owed, they slunk into crime, stealing whatever they thought should belong to them. When eventually they were caught, the brothers were reluctantly sent to live with their only other known relative, an uncle named Alfred, in a small village hidden in the woods of Ontario. They had heard stories about their uncle from their parents, but never met him in person. He was a renowned hunter in his day. He traveled across the country and eventually settled in Canada, always sending stories of the woods he now hunted, the game he would chase, the locals, and even tales of some local legends. Or so he thought. The story slowly stopped, and he began only reaching out as his finances sank. Henrik's parents told the boys their uncle had gone mad and broke off contact. What they didn't say is that the stories became fearful. Alfred had made a deal with the locals to hunt in their woods and provide them with meat from his kills. The locals did not dare hunt in the woods for fear they might not come back. In return, they would trade their goods with him and let him stay in the village. But he was not to hunt more than his fill, and not after dark, as is the rule of the land. Alfred was confident in his ability, however, to hunt at night, and so he disregarded the warnings. What the locals didn't tell him, at least not until after he broke their rules, is about the creature that lives in the woods. It had prowled the dark brush and snatched away anyone who hunted and wandered its territory at night. As they hunted less, and only in daylight, the attack slowed and eventually stopped altogether. But now that this new blood had entered its hunting ground, its interest in the town was reignited, and Alfred was the main course. Because of this, the townspeople stopped granting him favors and bringing him materials and food for trade. He was on his own. When he reached out to Henrik's parents, they shunned him, thinking he was going crazy and speaking nonsense about the spirit of the forest hunting him. A now broken and frantic man would have two others to worry about, and young boys at that, who don't know the difference between inessential and necessity. Henrik and Samuel were dropped off at the start of the silent town, confused as they walked through the streets, unaware of the terrible threat nearby. They were not told which house belonged to their uncle, so they wandered unapologetically, kicking and shuffling past the townspeople and speaking obnoxiously, as if they were the only ones around. It was almost dark, so most had already retreated to their homes for fear of the creature. It had not yet entered the town, but they were not eager to greet it if it had decided to change its mind. The boys were lost without a clue of where to find their uncle, and too stubborn to ask for help. Hanging over nearly every window were signs that showed a scribbled black silhouette of what looked like a tall, malnourished man with glowing white, beady eyes sunken back into its skull. Its long, slender arms tapered to the bony wrists, and two five-fingered claws sprouted out like branches of a dying tree. The boys shared a glance of confusion mixed with concern, then heard a loud crash nearby. Startled, yet curious, they investigated and found an old, dilapidated church close to the back edge of town. A frail old man was looking through a broken stained glass window, cursing about how not even the church was safe. What's more curious were the tools the man seemed to be carrying. A huge pitchfork and a long rifle held tightly in his hands. "Hey, old man, we're looking for our uncle. Any old hunters live around here?"
"This town's finished. It's cursed. Get inside where you can, or leave while you have the chance. If you've come to help your kin, follow that path. But be quick, or be dead. And whatever you do, stay away from the woods. Tonight, the Wendigo joins the hunt."
The Wendigo is a beast-like humanoid creature that possesses people when they give in to taboo practices like greed, excess, and particularly cannibalism. While scholars believe that the myth of the Wendigo first began with Native American tribes seeking a way to promote a culture of moderation and cooperation, the legend continues to live on in popular culture, thanks in part, no doubt, to movies and TV. The Wendigo is often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics, which possesses human beings. The Wendigo is said to invoke feelings of insatiable greed, hunger, the desire to cannibalize other humans, and the propensity to commit murder in those that fall under its influence. In some representations, the Wendigo is described as a giant humanoid with a heart of ice. A foul stench or sudden unseasonable chill might precede its approach. They were strongly associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. A description by Basil H. Johnston, an Ontario scholar, goes as follows. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin. Its complexion an ash-gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh, the Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Some appearances of the Wendigo in media include movies like The Last Winter, Pet Sematary, The Retreat, and The Wendigo. In TV shows such as Fear Itself, Supernatural, and Charmed. And video games such as Until Dawn and Fallout 76. Now alone on the streets of this unknown town, Henrik and Samuel felt more lost than ever. Who was that man in the church? Why was he holding weapons and speaking nonsense about the creature called the Wendigo? Is this why their parents decided to stop talking to Uncle Alfred? Did these town people drive him mad? So many questions. Confusion met with anger in the boys' thoughts. Their nerves became uneasy. They shouldn't be here. But now they are, and with nowhere else to go. The old man told them to follow a tight, overgrown path between the back border of the town, only a few feet away from the start of the woods. With no other sense of direction, the brothers reluctantly walked the path. The proximity of the trees to the houses killed any remaining light of the dying sun, and darkness draped over them like a heavy blanket. The rancid odor of rotting flesh attacked from the building side of the path, and the brothers turned, realizing the houses were abandoned. The only thing left was the pitch black empty of the open doors and broken windows that seemed to follow them like eyes, and a sickening presence, as if a manifestation of the stench itself would crawl out from inside. As they pressed along, they finally came across a small clearing with a small cabin protruding from the even line of houses to either side, and standing at the single space in the wall of trees, acting as the entrance to the woods. A gravitational force focused on this space as if it was somehow being pulled in to feed the forest itself. The blanket of night had fallen to full effect, and the cabin was lit by a single handheld lantern burning a bright orange red. Henrik and Samuel, now terrified out of their minds, slowly approached the small, dimly lit house, not even certain that their uncle truly lived here. Just a few feet away, into the trees, they heard what sounded like a crush of weight on a pile of dry branches. They hesitated, one looking for an answer to the noise in the woods, and the other fixated on the cabin. The door suddenly flew open with such violence one of the rusty hinges broke clean off. Out came a tall man with graying hair and an unkempt beard, hunched over a small tin box and holding a long rifle, much like the man from the church. He moved nervously under a long heavy coat and muttered under his breath repeatedly, "Tonight is the night. Tonight is the night. It's either me or you. The debt will be repaid. Tonight is the night." "Uncle Alfred?" Samuel said in an almost whispered sigh of relief, recognizing him from old family pictures. The man, not noticing the boys in the dark until Samuel's words, jumped so startled he dropped a tin box, spilling its contents, and drew his weapon, aiming at them. When he realized who they were and decided they weren't just his imagination, he let his rifle fall with him as he dropped to his knees. Tears in his eyes, he held out his arms to embrace his nephews. They ran to him and held each other. "No, no, no, why? Not tonight, of all nights." Samuel glanced over at the ground where the small box was dropped. It was filled with many thin, long, cylindrical pieces of metal that tapered to a point and glistened brilliantly in the moonlight. Silver bullets. Samuel, feeling drawn to their radiance, pocketed one of them, thinking maybe he could sell it at a later time. Henrik, now broken away from the trance of the forest, complains, "Hey, why the hell didn't you tell us where you live? We were just left on the road to wander the town on our own. We're tired and hungry, so aren't you going to invite us inside and make us some food?" I didn't know," Alfred said blankly as his thoughts were elsewhere. His eyes trailed to the trees, then back to the boys. "I'm sorry, but you can't stay." "What? But we just got here." "I swear, you really have gone crazy." "Fine, but at least give us some money. We'll be fine on our own. It's not like you've ever helped us before." A piercing screech interrupted Henrik. Whatever it was, it made Alfred go pale, as if turned to stone by Medusa herself. Henrik followed the gaze of his uncle and immediately understood. His uncle was not crazy. He was afraid. And now, so were they all. In the woods between the trees, and lit only by the faint moonlight, the silhouette of a figure stood seemingly 10 feet tall and danced effortlessly between shadow and light. Its thin, bony limbs commanded the tree branches around them. Its deathly white skin faded into the formless pale fog of the woods, its movement only perceivable by the weak glow of its beady white eyes. They needed no explanation. It was the Wendigo. Alfred shuddered, frantically gathered the silver bullets, and loaded the rifle. When he turned to face the creature, it was gone. He turned to the brothers, pulled out a large hunting knife, and handed it to Henrik.
Go now. You have to leave. This knife has a silver blade. If it gets past me, it'll come for you next. Find shelter, and if you have no other choice, find your moment to drive this blade into its heart. I'm sorry. It was supposed to be only me.
A bitter cold swept over them. Wide-eyed and no longer in any mood to complain, Henrik listened and grabbed Samuel by the wrist. Both began slow, partially paralyzed by fear. Then they heard the creature's cry again, followed by several gunshots, and they burst into a full sprint back down the path toward the old church. They ran without looking back, as if their own shadow was not to be trusted. The heavy thumps of footsteps trailed close behind as the creature gave chase. The terrible sounds of snarling and claws scratching bounced off the walls and through the alleys of the nearby buildings. Finally, the church was in sight. Having heard the shots, the old man was peering out from inside the broken window with curiosity. He saw the boys running and opened the heavy wooden doors to rush them inside. They shut the doors and dropped a large bar to lock them, hoping that would be enough to keep the beast out. The three quickly ran to hide behind the pews and tried to quiet their breathing as they listened for the Wendigo's movements. The quiet of night was overwhelming. Then a single sudden slam against the wooden church doors, and a long, painfully slow scrape across the wall filled their hearts with dread. Much time passed, yet there were no more sounds. The boys were both shaking uncontrollably, Henrik gripping the silver knife with both hands, and Samuel clenching the silver bullet he took from the ground. The old man grew restless. He needed to know if that monster was still around or if it had gone. But there had been no noise for some time. It must have moved on, right? Just a peek. He turned to the boys, holding a finger over his lips to keep them quiet. They shook their heads, not wanting the man to leave. He ignored and stood ever so slowly, scanning his environment, seeing nothing but the broken window and moonlight pouring through. He looked down to the boys with a crooked smile.
The beast is gone. It's moved on. We're safe.
In an instant, the man was gone, leaving nothing but the splatter of blood and crushing of bones, breaking mere feet away. Henrik looked at Samuel, knowing they shared the same thought. The Wendigo is here, in the church, with us. And it knows where we are, so we need to move. Knowing they'd only get one chance, they grab every weapon available as the monster feasts on the old man. The pitchfork, the silver knife, and the silver bullet loaded into the man's rifle. They stood slowly and moved carefully towards the center aisle, quietly. But the creaking of the old floorboards gave them away. The beast stopped and lay still for a moment, then gave a low growl as it stood to its full height, in the light of the moon through the broken window, allowing the brothers to see the Wendigo in all of its horrific glory. In a flash, the creature lunged at Henrik, who was holding firmly onto the pitchfork and had rooted its base into the wooden floor, letting the spikes fall out in front of him. The Wendigo dashed straight with such force it vaulted over the boy as it was caught by the farm tool. Knowing this wouldn't be enough to stop it, Samuel took aim. He waited for his moment as the Wendigo rose, disoriented. It gave a long screech once more and turned to Samuel. As it jumped towards him, he closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. The beast fell again, collapsing onto Samuel, pinning him down. Blood pooled around him as the creature slowly stood, looking down at Samuel's still body. Then, at a small hole in the center of its chest, flowing with blood. It took a wide step over Samuel and raised a large claw, preparing to finish him off. Just as the massive hand descended, the beast stopped. Henrik had stepped between them, with silver knife outstretched, pressing it into the heart of the beast, driving it through until it protruded from its back. The Wendigo took one last gasp of its decaying breath and stumbled to the ground, blood pulsing out of it and soaking into the cracks of the old wood floor. The creature, the Wendigo, demon of hunger, is dead. The only thing recovered from around Alfred's cabin was his heavy coat and his long rifle. His body was gone. Alone again, Henrik spent the coming days in the cabin learning exactly what type of hunter his uncle was. Piles of books and drawings, stories of shadowy creatures like the Wendigo, scattered the walls and floors of the small cabin. "Henrik, it's time to go. There's a carriage down the street. They've arranged to take us to the nearest city." Henrik turns to see Samuel standing in the doorway, the old man's rifle slung around his shoulder. There was a long pause. Henrik looks around the cabin again, then looks down and squeezes the handle of the silver knife, now in a sheath fastened to his belt. "No, I think I'm gonna stay. I think it's time we learn to provide for ourselves, and maybe even for others from time to time. There's work to be done here." Thanks for listening. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing, and stay tuned as we find out how our hunter friends and some new characters fare against the ultimate creature of the night, the vampire.